Hello, this is Brian Zanti with the Turing School of Software and Design, and I'm here to talk to you today about object-oriented programming. Now, object-oriented programming is a style of programming where we attempt to model our programs like the physical world where objects are interacting with other objects. So we attempt to do the same thing, think about our code in the same way. When we talk about object-oriented programming, typically we're going to start with two different things. We're going to have classes and we're going to have instances. So a class is a very general idea of something. So for instance, I can think of a person. So I'll write that down. I can think of a person. And then we also have specific instances, which are specific people. So person, very general idea, what is a person? Instances might be Brian, I am a person. I might have another instance of Frank. Frank is also a person. So again, the class is very general. The instances are very specific. What goes along with a class? Typically, a class is going to do two things. It's going to model state and behavior. State we typically refer to as attributes. So this is what are the characteristics that define something. And then behavior is what does something do. So typically we call these methods. So this is what actions can something take or what can be done to something. Typically, attributes are going to be nouns and methods are going to be verbs. So for my person class, some attributes that I might have are, I might have a name attribute, and I might have an age attribute as well. So these are some defining characteristics. You can probably think of others for a person, but we'll keep it pretty simple for now. Our actions, typically what our actions are going to do is they're going to use or modify our attributes. So looking at this name, something that I could do with it is I might be able to have a greeting. So I might be able to say like, hello, my name is Brian or Frank or whatever my name is. Same thing with age. Something that I could do with age is that I could have a birthday. So when I have a birthday, it should increase my age by 1. So again, this is very, very general here. Attributes of name and age. When I have specific instances, I'll call this instance Brian. And now my instance is going to have specific attributes like name equals Brian and age equals 26. Same thing with Frank. Frank's going to have some attributes. And Frank is going to have a name of Frank and an age of 65. And I'll put a separator here just so we can see the distinction between up above here. We have the class, which is a very general, what is a person, what can a person do, what kind of attributes does a person have. When we get into instances, these are specific instances of that person. So Brian is a specific instance, Frank is a specific instance. So let's go ahead and get into making this in Ruby. In order to make a class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type the keyword class. And notice this is a keyword it highlights. And I am going to make a person class. And I can go ahead and run this code. And notice how nothing happens. So Ruby saw this class and it said like, okay, cool, there's a person class, but we didn't actually tell it to do anything. Again, this class is still like very abstract, very general. We haven't actually created any instances from this class. So let's go ahead and do that. We make a instance with the .new method. So I take my class and call .new on it. And I'm going to go ahead and save an instance to a variable. In order to create a second person, I am just simply going to call that method again. And so what this should do is it should create two different people. In order to see something printed to the screen, I'm going to use P in order to print. And I'm going to print out Brian, and I'm going to print out Frank. And let's go ahead and see what happens. So what we see here is Ruby's representation of a person object or person instance. They are very similar, so this pound bracket notation and then person to tell me what type of object it is. And then this number after here, don't worry too much about it, but just think of it as like a unique identifier. Notice how the numbers at the end are a little bit different. The first one ends in 7-0, the second one ends in 4-8, and that's indicating to me that these are indeed two separate objects, two separate instances of our person class. Great. So we've made our person class, we've made a couple instances. Let's go ahead and talk about these attributes. So we said earlier that we want our person to have a name and an age attribute. And so let's go ahead and look at what that might look like. I'm going to use a special method here called initialize. And what this method does is when our person is created, so when we call .new, this initialize method is going to run. And just like the name might suggest, initialize is going to do all the things that we need to do when our person is first created, when it's first initialized. So what I want to do is I want to set up my attributes. And the way you make an attribute in Ruby is with this @ symbol and then a variable name. So @name, @age, and I'll fill this in later. These are also referred to instance variables because they are specific to an instance. Now what I don't want to do here is I don't want to do something like this. Because this is, again, remember the person class is, in general, how does a person behave? And I don't want to say that every person has a name of Brian and every person has an age of 26. And watch what happens when I run this. Now my output is telling me that both of these people have an instance variable or an attribute called name, and the name is equal to Brian and the age is equal to 26, but both people have the same name and the same age. So what we want to do is we actually want to accept some arguments so that our person can say what is their name and age from the beginning. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept a initial, or let's say, given name and an initial age. And so rather than hard coding this here, I will allow us to pass in this data. The way that you pass in data to the initialize method is through the .new method. So here I will give Brian a name of Brian and an age of 26. And I will give Frank a name of Frank and an age of 65. And now I'll run this file again. And now I can see each person has their own unique attributes. Let's go ahead and talk about the methods. So in order to define a method, I'm going to use my def keyword. Initialize is a special kind of method. Now I'm going to come up with my own methods here. So I'll go ahead and make my greet method. And so what I want this method to do is I want it to give me back a greeting. And so what I might say is I want this method to return a greeting to me. And I'll come back to that in just a second. So I'll make a string here, and I want my person to say, hello, my name is. And so typically what we want our methods to do is we want it to use or modify an attribute. And so what this method is going to do is it's going to take our name, which we've stored in @name, and interpolate it into the string of hello, my name is. So now down here, rather than printing out the objects themselves, I'm going to call this greet method and print that out. So now when I run this, I'll see the first person printed out, hello, my name is Brian. The second person printed out, hello, my name is Frank. So what happened here is when I called this method, Brian, being an instance of the person class, looked inside of its class definition to say, how do I call the greet method? So it saw this greet method and it said, oh, I need to make this string. And it took its own unique name and put it into this string. Frank did the same exact thing, except Frank had a different name. When this method was called, what it did was it returned this string. So the return value is the output of a method. It's what you get back from a method call. So when I called the method down here with .greet, it returned to me this string. So essentially this method call became, I might write it like this became the value, hello, my name is Brian. And so then what Ruby did was it took that return value and it used that to print out. Frank did the same exact thing, except Frank had the name of Frank. So the return value is the output of our method. The return value is always the last line of code in Ruby. Just keep that in mind. So we have one method here. It is using one of our attributes. Something else that is very common for methods to do is to modify an attribute. And our age is a perfect example for that. So I might have a method called haveBirthday. And when I call this, this should increase our age by 1. So what I want my person to do is I want it to take its age and increment it by 1. So I'm going to use plus equal to increment my age by 1. So let's go ahead and call some of these methods. So I'm not going to print out this method right now. I'm just going to call it. And so what I'm expecting is when I print out Brian again, now that Brian has had a birthday, it should have taken this age of 26, this attribute, and modified it to increase it to 27. And so now we can see when we print out Brian, the age is 27. Just to be really clear about this, let's go ahead and print out Brian before we have a birthday and Brian after we have a birthday so we can see the difference. And there we go. Our first printout had an age of 26, and our second printout had an age of 27. Notice when I print out Frank here, whoops, no dot. Notice when I print out Frank here, Frank's age didn't change at all. Frank's age is still 65. So we called the method on Brian, which didn't affect Frank at all, because these are two separate instances of our person class. Okay, that is everything I wanted to cover today. I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you very much for watching.